Going to discuss about the about four theories of international relations. We are going to talk about realism. So NCUK wants you to grasp the following concepts supported by realism: human nature, anarchy, statism, self-help, and survival as principles of that can promoted by realism. Then you have to know about the concept of power in realism and related strategies, such as balance of power, strategies to achieve power, and also you need to be able to develop some criticisms. Another theory which you must grasp, and it actually comes quite often in the past papers, is liberalism. So for this theory, again, you have to understand, or you have to be able to discuss about the human nature. The concept of idealism would come as a separate question. Then you can also you have to also talk about the institutions. Also, you have to know about the role of the institutions, reciprocity, interdependence, and then in terms of international regimes, you need to be able to discuss about the concept of modernization, civil society, collective goods, with the components of collective security and human security. And another set of theories which we're going to also discuss today, the game theories, the zero-sum game and non-zero-sum game. So in this case, you have to talk about, also you have to link it to security dilemma and prisoner's dilemma. Further, if we're talking about the security dilemma and prisoner's dilemma, they are related to neorealism and neoliberalism. So for neorealism, you need to know what is defensive and offensive realism and security dilemma, so you'll connect it to the game theories. In neoliberalism, you should be able to discuss what is institutionalism, cooperation, and prisoner's dilemma as part of the game theories. So the concept map itself would give you that overview of the concepts you need to grasp. As part of your answers, you should be able to discuss two features of each theory. So it's up to you how you want to develop your answers. Sometimes the questions are specific. So for instance, in certain past papers, you might actually have a topic of, for example, explain the concept of human nature in IR. So in this case, you have to discuss it from both realist and liberal perspective. So another way which you could revise on the theories is to have a look into distribution of theories, of IR theories, according to the levels of analysis approach. You'll find more information in Goldstein and Pevenhouse. This is going to give you the full set of theoretical approaches and how do they fit into the levels of analysis approach. I just took this map from the book so that you could have an understanding how you can link, for example, the theories of IR to the actors of international relations. We discussed about the actors of IR yesterday, so if you didn't attend yesterday's session, feel free to view the presentation from yesterday and just recap on it. So realism, neorealism would be classified as part of interstate level of analysis, which means that realism and neorealism will focus and will analyze the state-to-state relationships. Therefore, you will not be able, for example, to apply realism to analyze the individuals, right? You will only apply realism to states. So therefore, if you're going to use any examples, you need to make sure that you focus on the right actors of IR. Liberal theories have two streams. One of them focuses on the idea of democratic peace, or else in Module E we discussed about the domestic influences on foreign policy, right? So liberal or democratic, the concept of democratic peace is going to somehow, let's say, be at the crossroads of domestic and interstate level of analysis. And then we have liberal institutionalism or neoliberalism that focuses on interstate level of analysis. So even though liberalism accepts would accept those international regimes and organizations, liberalism and neoliberalism still would focus on the place states have in the international system. So this is why we still classify it as part of interstate level of analysis. Then we have the social theories, which mostly would focus not just, they will not focus only on the state itself, but they're going to focus on those groups within the state or groups on the international level which are going to influence the international system. And then we have the constructivist and postmodernist theories which are focusing on domestic level of analysis. And then we have the peace studies and gender theories which are at the crossroads of individual and domestic level of analysis. And the last theory which we have as part of our syllabus is the Marxist theory. And Marxist theory, in our case, we are only going to analyze the idea of imperialism, and therefore we are going to focus on that global level of analysis. So if you've attended the session yesterday, and if you're going to review the again the session, or say the part where we discussed about the actors of IR, you are going to actually see the connection or the strong connection between the two charts. So in terms of realism, first and foremost, what you have to remember about realism, realism is the most dominant theory of international relations, and it is considered one of the, let's say, old theories of IR. Of course, you're going to focus on interstate level of analysis, and the focus of the realism is the power politics, right? Or the ability of the states to exercise their power on international level in order to achieve their goals. Further, the states, according to realism, are considered unitary actors, and they are all in the states, according to realism, are motivated by the desire for military powers and security rather than ethics and morals, right? So again, as I mentioned it this afternoon, let's say you could criticize realism from the liberal perspective and imply the fact that they do not really care about morals and ethics, and they're more oriented to the development of military power. Further, if you're talking about the human nature from the realist perspective, human nature is selfish, conflictual, and it's inherently aggressive, which means that the conflict cannot be avoided. So the human nature as an aggressive, or say the aggressiveness of human nature is discussed as part of the offensive realism, and further the idea of security is widely discussed as part of the defensive realism. So in terms of branches of realism, we can identify two major branches of realism, classic realism and neo-realism. Classic realism is a conservative theory which would focus on the idea that the states are the only actors of IR, and therefore would give a lot of importance on maximization of power and development of military power. Neorealism was developed towards the let's say the first idea started to be began to be developed in during the Cold War. However, it took a lot of, let's say, the school itself has experienced a quick development towards the end of a Cold War, beginning of let's say beginning of the hegemony of the U.S. hegemony, for the simple reason that the classic realism, we'll say towards the end of 80s, the classic realism could not anymore explain how the states are, let's say the relationships between the states and all those events that were happening at the end of the Cold War. So in terms of neorealism, the concept itself was developed by Kenneth Waltz, and he was the one who emphasized on the power distribution. He identified two ways in which the states could actually behave, or let's say, and integrated them into streams in terms of defensive realism, where the states will be security maximizers and their major concern will be the survival and the, let's say, through the security maximization, and offensive realism, which mainly focuses on the major powers. And from this perspective, the states are power maximizers, and they're going to exercise power in order to achieve their goals. In terms of concepts which you could later use as part of your answers, I've included 10 essential concepts which you can use as part of your answers in the exam. So first and foremost, of course, you can talk about human nature. As I mentioned before, human nature is inherently selfish, and this is why the conflict cannot be avoided. These are constant features of human nature. Since the individuals will have that moral right to sacrifice themselves for the sake of freedom, the state does not have the right to put any kind of morals ahead of the politics. So they are going to mainly focus on that national interest, which would help them to achieve their goals. And the state is going to only promote any kind of moral goals if they contribute to the survival of that particular state. Another concept which is widely promoted by realism is anarchy. So from the perspective of realists, the situation of anarchy is permanent. In terms of the internal structure, the states solve that problem of order, or they solve that problem of anarchy and established security by let's say implementing the concept of sovereignty. From the perspective on the external, as part of the external environment, there is no guarantee of any kind of sovereignty. So therefore, the international system is anarchic, and it depends on the capabilities, or the short-term or long-term capabilities of the states, how they can ensure their survival, or how they can follow on their interests. Another three concepts that are important in realism are statism, self-help, and survival. And they can be integrated as part of as principles of realism. So just by knowing these three principles, you could use them as answers and integrate it you could integrate it as um, your answers, and therefore you could use them in your I'll say you could use any of these three concepts to create those two paragraphs as part of the answers. So the concept or the principle of statism in realism would argue that the state is the primary actor, and all other actors in the world politics are of a lesser significance. So the state sovereignty would represent that existence of an independent political community which has the judicial or authority over their own territory, and there is no other, let's say, supranational institution that could actually interfere in the internal affairs of the states. In terms of criticism of the concept of statism, the criticism mainly come from the liberal perspective, which argues that actually the states, or let's say lately, are challenged both from internal and external perspective. So internally, the states are challenged by the civil society, or by the development of those NGOs, some informal leaders within the society. From the external perspective, the states, or the existence of the state, are actually influenced by they're influenced by the global community, by the international regimes, or those international norms, and also by the intergovernmental organizations. The concept of self-help would state that the state, or let's say, would argue that the states cannot actually rely on any other on any institution, or they cannot rely on, for example, international law. They cannot rely on intergovernmental organizations when it comes to to get any help. So therefore, states will develop their own means to ensure the security and non-intervention from other states. So that can happen either by joining alliances, or if we're talking about the security internally, that will happen by developing those short-term capabilities, and also let's say, investing a lot in the development of the long-term capabilities, especially that economic sustainability. So the principle of self-help will mainly be applicable for the powerful states, because self-help would require the states to have more power, and they need to have those means that would be available to secure their interests relative to others. Okay, so this would be also, you could, for example, use this principle of self-help. I'll say, as an example here, you could probably use the idea, or say the reasons why U.S. interfered in Afghanistan and after the 9/11 attacks, and also you could use it to explain the reasons why U.S., for example, attacked Iraq in 2003. So there are many ways you could actually use, or you could, let's say, there are many examples you could actually have here as supporting points. Further, if you want to also talk about some criticism regarding self-help, similar to the principle of statism, the criticism towards self-help are coming from the liberal perspective. Liberalism actually argues that the self-help is something, something that cannot be avoided. Therefore, the states might, instead of developing those internal means to protect themselves, or let's say instead of developing the short-term capabilities, they would rather prefer collective security systems or some regional security communities, because in this case they are going to this is going to be an alternative. The states would not have it will bring more utility, because the states will not have to develop this means in long run, and would spend, or let's say waste their resources for this kind of action. So as an example here, you can have NATO. So as you can see, again, you could actually use, for example, the concept of statism and self-help as two independent paragraphs of a short answer question. And if you're going, it's going to be excellent if you can, for example, have one paragraph on statism where you show the features and the criticism and an example of it. And same if you have a second paragraph where you explain self-help with the characteristics and the criticism for it. Another concept or principle of realism, which is very important, and it's a capstone of a realist perspective, is the concept of survival. According to realism, the main reason for the states to, or let's say, to create a political entity, to implement sovereignty, to ensure that concept of self-help, is to survive. So it doesn't matter actually if these are powerful states or these are, let's say, less developed states. The main objective is to survive, or the main objective is to maintain that political entity going on. So the concept of survival for realism is one of the major national interests to which all the political leaders have to, also all the political leaders have to follow it. And from let's say, this concept of survival can be also linked to the rationality or the rational choices, whereby sometimes, for example, the states might actually go into negotiation process rather than war. However, the maneuver of the states in terms of their survival might be limited actually to their military potential, if that's a real threat to them. It might be also limited to international norms, their economic development or economic sustainability, internal policies or domestic environment, and civil society and nationalist movements. So if you look into the other theories, you can actually see that these criticisms to the concept of survival are coming from mostly from the liberal perspective. And also you could integrate it here if you're talking more about the civil society and nationalist movements. You could also criticize the concept of survival from the postmodernist perspective. Any questions until this point, guys?
Not for me.
Marwa?
No, I'm okay, miss.
All right. So in terms of power, we discussed about it a lot. And I mentioned it many times, that realism actually is, I'll say, the core concept of realism is that idea of power politics. So power is one of the core elements of the state survival for realists. And the power would include those means that would be available to secure their interest relative to other states. So we discussed many times about the elements of power. So we actually segregated them into short-term capabilities and long-term capabilities. From the long-term capabilities, you could talk about those, the economic sustainability or economic developments, and also the population, geography, natural resources are playing a major role to ensure the sustainability of power. Political culture and patriotism are very important from the realist perspective. Soft power, or the ability of the states to promote their own concepts or their own visions. Geopolitics plays a major role also, or let's say the geographical position of the state plays a major role in how they are going to exercise their power. And also the problem of the climate change lately would actually create quite a lot of challenges to states in terms of, let's say, using those long-term capabilities. Military force is part of the short-term capabilities for the simple reason that the state has to constantly invest in the development of new technologies, right? So the military-industrial complex, which we discussed in Module E, is a subject of constant development and constant change. So this is why, for realists, the military-industrial complex is one of the most important features. As part of the power, or the concept of power from realist perspective, we have to also mention the balance of power, where according to realism, the states are going to actually join some alliances which are going to be close to the which are going to be close to their own, let's say, interests, which are going to be close to their own visions about the international system. So therefore, for the balance, for alliances will play a key role in balance of power. So building up those capabilities against each other might actually make the states to maintain their dominance for quite a lot of time. As part of Neorealism, and this is what we are going to discuss a little bit later, but I'm just going to make an overview just in case I didn't include it in the other part. Let's say Neorealism and Realism are also discussing that idea of power distribution, right? And power distribution is also a way of maintaining the balance of power, right? But often the power distribution itself would refer mostly to the great powers rather than it is going to refer to the weaker states. Why? For the simple reason that usually, let's say, the greater powers have those capabilities, short-term and long-term, which would allow them to influence the behavior of the weaker states, whereby the weaker states will prefer to simply follow the directives or the policies of the stronger states. So we could identify three, let's say, power systems whereby we could have a unipolar world where there will be a single actor that has enough power to dominate as a hegemon, or a bipolar world, let's say, and in a bipolar or multipolar world, we are going to have a balance between two powers in the bipolar world, like with the example that would be in during the Cold War, or a multipolar world, which would be an example of a current world system. So that is it for the realist perspective in terms of classic realism, and there are some ideas that are promoted also by the Neorealism. Another theory which we could which we need to make an overview for, and the questions from this theory are coming quite often in your past papers, including semester 2 exams. So we're going to discuss about liberalism. Liberalism as a perspective developed mainly after the World War I, and the first stream of liberalism that actually, or let's say, kind of promoted that idea of cooperation was idealism. So liberalism itself is a perspective that believes in repetitive relationships or collaborative relationships among the states. It is also a theory that focuses on interstate level of analysis. And also liberalism focuses on the idea that establishing institutions might actually help to reduce the incidence of conflicts. Liberalism emphasizes as well on the idea of human nature. However, from the perspective of liberalism, human nature can be improved, and human nature is positive. So democratic relations are necessary for liberal improvement, which means that let's say the collaboration between different institutions and different groups of people might actually reduce from that incidence of increased tension and conflict. Another let's say concept that could be included in as part of the human nature is the fact that liberalists would see the rule of IR, the rules of IR is constantly changing. Let's say similar to human nature that is in constant change or is ready for change, the institutions and organizations are in constant change as well, and that actually allows the international system to continue its existence and to balance up any kind of tensions that would rise during the particular events. Idealism as part of liberalism developed after World War I, and it actually would give a lot of importance to the international law, morality, international organizations, and would put power or power politics aside. Idealism also emphasizes on the importance of negotiations as part of that cooperation process. They also support the idea of human nature as a positive one. And one of the distinction between the classic liberalism and idealism is that they put forward the morality. So according to idealism, actually, as soon as the states have joined any kind of intergovernmental organizations or signed any kind of treaties, they have that moral obligation to follow them in order to avoid any conflict. Woodrow Wilson was one of the biggest supporters of idealism. Why this stream of liberalism got called idealism? Because actually, let's say some of these ideas were after the World War II. Some of these ideas were considered utopic, and let's say they did not really fit into the context, right? For the simple reason that, for instance, even though the League of Nations was created after World War I, and the states have developed that international regime of, let's say, of international law. They all signed the covenant of, let's say, the states that were part of the Covenant of Nations signed treaties and conventions. Still, the World War II happened, and which actually implies the fact that. Let's say the states will not always follow some moral principles as part of their behavior. Some, let's say, similar to the realism, I've selected 10 concepts of that are related to realism, to liberalism. We spoke about human nature. We spoke about the idealism. Another important let's say concept that is part of the liberal perspective are the institutions. So technically, the development of institutions might overcome certain contexts, and might actually, um, let's say, help the states to collaborate, right? So institutions are those structures and mechanisms that govern collective behavior. So if we want to connect it to certain modules that we took in second semester, you definitely can give many examples of institutions. If you're going to focus, or you can give examples of regimes and institutions from module G. So you could talk here, you could talk about the international humanitarian law here, you could talk about the human rights regime, and so on, right? So the creation of United Nations after World War II as a major organization ensured that major conflicts are avoided and are concentrated, and the conflicts are only concentrated in particular regions. So that is one of the things, I'll say that is one of the achievements of the current international regime. Rather, let's say, even though you might consider it not as important as effective, it still allows the international community to avoid major conflicts, especially if we're talking about the era of globalization. Another concept, and I think, Mohammed, you'll see here the reply to your question whether you can use reciprocity as part of liberalism. Liberalism emphasizes on the principle of reciprocity, and the concept of reciprocity itself is an important part of the liberal perspective. According to liberalism, human beings behave on the basis of how other groups behave towards them. So this would be called reciprocity. It would help to overcome the anarchic system. And according to the liberals, human beings tend to act reciprocally and peacefully and have a positive attitude if this concepts or these ideas are integrated at the level of global institutions. We also discussed about interdependence. Because liberalism is one of the biggest supporters of globalization, interdependence is an important concept of liberalism as well. So liberals are trying to explain it as they argue that more frequent and intense interactions among the states would lead to the mutual benefits, or would lead to to the utility, I'll say more, and will of actions, and will lead to interdependence. So the greater this dependence is, the most likely the states are not going to break those reciprocity relations, because they will all have to gain from it, and they will all have a certain level of utility, or say they will all have a certain rate of utility out of their actions. And we had an example of how interdependence works in terms of having 3 states that would start developing some trade relations. So interdependence, or let's say from liberal perspective, and especially integrated in neoliberalism, argues, or let's say attempts to explain those trade relations between the states. So in our case, we said that there are 3 states that are would aim to develop the relationships between each other. So at the first stage, there are only two states who started to trade with what they produce, so with food and clothes. Then the state A also signed a trade agreement with the state B, and they started to trade with the goods they're producing. And as a last stage of interdependence, state B and C will have a direct trade agreement that would also help them to actually ensure their economic sustainability and to gain some benefits out of it. So as a result, you can see that if you look into the numbers here, you can see that the state that started the chain of relationships first has more benefits rather than the state or the state that joined in this chain the latest. So you could also explain this as part of your answers. For example, you could use the concept of institutions and the concept of interdependence and develop it as part of your short answer questions. Or else you could use it as part of essay type questions. So for example, if you have an essay for module H and you're discussing about the economic globalization, you could discuss interdependence as part of globalization, and you could have a paragraph that would show interdependence from the liberal perspective. We also discussed about international regimes, and part of the international regimes is the international law with all its branches. And we said, I would say, from the liberal perspective, the international regimes or international institutions coordinate expectations and behavior of other states prior to creation of some formal rules. They are also seen as formal institutions that were created in order to help the states to adjust their domestic policies. The international regimes also help in terms of conflict, or say in the situations of conflict, like for example, if we refer to the humanitarian law, you could see, and you could actually, let's say, if you're going to return back to the laws of war topics, you're going to actually see how humanitarian law supports or helps the states to integrate, let's say, in certain rules of how they have to behave during war or after the war ended. So in terms of international regimes, as part of liberalism, of course, you could also give criticisms here, and you could give the let's say, argue around the drawbacks of international law. For example, from Marxist perspective, international law would rather be an example of the domination of the Western powers and domination of their own visions, rather than an attempt to, let's say, pacify or to be used by all the actors in the international system. So the last two concepts important in liberalism are the modernization and civil society. So liberalism is sustained by the concept of modernization. According to liberalism, and when we discussed about the human nature, we said that human nature is inherently positive, prone to change. So part of this concept is that the concept of modernization, which brought into the international relations or in global politics new actors. We could say that you could argue here, you could include here the idea of the growing importance, for example, of the non-state actors such as IGOs, non-governmental organizations. You could also explain as part of the modernization process. You could also explain the role of the corporations, and why not, you could also discuss here about the activity of the terrorist groups. And last but not the least is the civil society. Most of the non-state actors created that civil society of a state, and sometimes the civil society of particular state or those NGOs, non-state actors, might be related, might be connected to some global NGOs, especially if we're talking about NGOs that are following up on human rights activities, and they are actually helping to ensure, let's say, to advocate for human rights and to make changes in both domestic and international legal structures. Yeah, and collective goods, again, Mohammed, I think that is going to be the answer to one of your questions. Part of the concept of reciprocity, will say the collective goods problem can be sorted out from the perspective of principle of reciprocity, and collective goods problem has been discussed by the liberalism, and they, from the perspective of liberalism, the collective goods problem can be sorted out in two ways. First and foremost, the collective goods problem could be sorted out from the perspective of collective security. So in this case, the states could, let's say, create those regional military organizations that could actually take on board certain security issues or security measures, or delegate it to the United Nations as supranational organizations. However, another point of, let's say, another major focus of the collective goods from the perspective of liberalism is the concept of human security, and in this case, liberalism actually focuses on the idea of how the states could ensure that food security, or ensure the let's say any kind of let's say the how they could secure people, the global community from scarcity, for example, of resources, how they could help or support global community in terms of let's say access to in situations of war and conflict. This is it for liberalism. Any questions?
Not from me.
Marwa, any questions?
No, I'm okay, miss. Actually, miss, for realism, 1 minute. Oh, never mind, it's okay. No, I wrote it down, it's okay.
All right, are you guys able to afford Neo streams and the game theories, or not? Because if you're not able, or let's say you feel it's too much, I could include them tomorrow in one of the sessions, let's say in the afternoon, or I could integrate it as part of the session on the past papers. So you have a choice. I can continue, or I can leave it for tomorrow. Mohammed, I can hear you if you're talking about something.
I'm not sure. I think I'm okay with either. Can be today or tomorrow.
What about you, Marwa? You feel it's too much, or?
No, it's okay. We can continue if it's okay with you.
It's fine for me. I'm not fasting, so I'm not in rush for the iftar, so it's fine for me, to be honest. All right, so neo streams. Okay, so in terms of neorealism and neoliberalism, you have to, I'll say both theories are integrated as part of learning objective 3. Both neorealism and neoliberalism are strongly related to the game theories as well. Why are they related to the game theories? Because both streams are actually using the game theories. In case of neorealism, we're talking about the security dilemma. In case of neoliberalism, we're talking about the prisoner's dilemma. They're using this particular tools in order to, let's say, estimate particular outcomes or to estimate the utility of particular actions of the states. So what do you have to remember about either of the two streams? First and foremost, neorealism and neoliberalism as theories of international relations were, I would say, gained a lot of popularity and at the end of 80s. Why did they gain a lot of popularity at the end of 80s? For the simple reason that neither of the classic streams of these two theories could have explained the changes that were happening at the end of the 80s, right? So if you return back to module B and you look into the learning objective before the end of the Cold War and all the changes that happened in the first few years of the first let's say of the 90s, you can see that you could hardly actually integrate those events into the classic streams. They would not be as effective. This is why the scholars of both schools have, let's say, took on board the let's say the tools provided by the game theories. So I'm going to first talk about the game theories, then I'm going to return back to the neo streams. Game theories is a tool that is used in international relations. Technically, the game theories might be used by any of the streams or any of the theories of IR. Game theories are mathematical tools, so they use statistics in order to generate the data. For you guys, we didn't actually manipulate, or we didn't actually have to generate any data. You just have to grasp the basics. So game theories would include modeling of a conflict among nations. So by looking into, for example, from the realist perspective, they would take on board those capabilities, short-term, long-term capabilities, like the GDP, the military-industrial complex data, and the scholars would actually, by comparing, for example, two states that are at the brink of conflict, they might actually model who's going to win, right? Or else, for a particular state, this is going to be in, let's say, the outcomes of this particular tool would actually kind of demonstrate whether there isn't any kind of utility to start even a conflict with another state. Game theories are also used for political campaigns and trading behavior in different markets. So in terms of conflict among nations, we're going to use security dilemma, and that is going to be part of neorealism. And in terms of political campaigns and trading behavior on different markets, the scholars are usually using prisoner's dilemma, and this is part of the neoliberal perspective. So another distinction between the Game theories, first and foremost, in IR we distinguish two types of game theories. The zero-sum game, which assumes the gain of one player or state at the expense of the other. This assumption is related as well to the idea that the states have little reason to communicate with each other due to divergent interests. So if you look into this last statement, you can say, well, this can be fully integrated in the realist and neo-realist concepts or security dilemma, and the zero-sum game will focus on that idea that the national interest of a particular state is one of the most important. The non-zero-sum game theories or prisoner's dilemma would assume that both players or states can gain by cooperating with each other, and it usually shows how states engage in trade or other forms of cooperation. So, as you might see from this particular idea, is that the non-zero-sum game can be integrated as part of the neoliberal perspective. So, this being said, how you could explain the security dilemma? First and foremost, you could say that security dilemma is the situation where the actions taken by a state to increase their own security might cause reactions from the other states. Usually, the security dilemma could explain the situation of deterrence. Most of the states are going to take care, or they're going to try and maximize their security in order to ensure their survival. Sometimes, if the utility allows them, the states would actually focus on increasing their, capabilities in order to, let's say, make other states follow their interests. However, from the perspective of security dilemma, and that is going to be part mostly of the defensive realism, the states, even if the states focus on their main goals, they don't really, most of the time, they don't have the intention to attack. So the main idea for them is to actually increase their security by decreasing security of the others. What else you could? So in terms of realism or neoliberalism and security dilemma, how you can relate security dilemma and actually game theories to the realist streams, and mostly that is going to be neo-realism. So offensive realism would emphasize on the effects of international anarchy on international system, because the system itself is a system of self-help, where the states will focus on their own interests in order to maximize their chance of security and survival. And for defensive realism, they will consider the security dilemma, or they will implement the security dilemma as one of the most important components in order to understand the utility of their actions. And for defensive realism, the states are going to maximize their change of security and survival by maintaining a position in international system, and they will not be prone to expand their territories, and they're not going to have those expansionist ideas. There are certain factors or variables that might actually affect the security dilemma, and let's say they are strongly related to that concept of utility. First and foremost, the ease of conquest, where the easier the target is, or the easier it is to win in a particular situation, the more intense security dilemma is going to be. So the states are going to actually try and have that win situation if they see that the enemy is going to be weak. The more difficult is it to win in a conflict or to win in a particular dispute, the security dilemma will be reduced. So usually you're not going to see two powerful states to have an intense security dilemma among themselves. you're going to normally see an intense let's say intense security dilemma among a stronger and a weaker nation. Another factor that might actually affect security dilemma is the regime type. So in this case, we're talking about, like, for example, two autocratic states might actually be more prone to have um, uh, a conflict, or an autocratic state and democratic state might have, we'll say, higher chances to have a security dilemma among them. So a pure example of this after the Cold War could be the relation between the US and Iraq after the Gulf War I, where, let's say, US was constantly considering Iraq as a threat for the security in the region, or for the let's say, as a threat to their partners in the region itself. Usually, two democratic states are not going to have an intense security dilemma among themselves, because they will not see the utility to, let's say, to go for a conflict when they can use negotiations in order to sort out a particular issue. Another factor that might affect security dilemma is revisionism, and we saw a good example of revisionism would be the German revisionism after World War I. In this case, the states are not going to look into, let's say, states are looking to increase their capabilities and influence in the region, and that might actually increase the security dilemma. So this is exactly what happened with Germany after the World War I, especially towards 30s, when Hitler came to power and started the militarization of Germany again, with a direct, let's say, direct target to to further attack, let's say, to further take over new territories in Europe or abroad. So if security dilemma is a zero-sum game, which brings the utility, or brings the I'll say, the winning situation to only one player, prisoner's dilemma is a non-zero-sum game. It is used in many fields, including IR. I'm not really sure, but I know that as part of your microeconomics or macroeconomics, you could have, let's say, the topic of the game theories, and most likely you also discussed prisoner's dilemma there too. A simple way to explain the situation, or let's say to explain the prisoner's dilemma, is to have two players. Let's say we discussed about two prisoners that were, let's say, were caught by police, set in different rooms, and they were trying, or the police was trying to make them confess in order to, let's say, in order to further set a punishment for them. So in this case, we have the component of utility, which would be counted from 1 to 10. So for example, the lowest utility is going to be of a choice would be 1. The highest utility of a choice would be 10, right? So for example, if both of the prisoners will not confess, this is going to give them a win-win situation. They will both stay in jail for around 1 year, and then they're going to be, or 2 years, and they're going to be set free. If either of two of them would confess, then one of them is going to have a full sentence. That would be I don't remember what I've included here, but around 10 years, and the other one is going to be set free. So that would be applicable for both. If they, let's say, if both of them don't confess, they stay in jail for 1 year or 2 years. If both of them will confess, they will stay in jail for around 5 years, right? And that actually represents for them the least utility of the choice. So the highest utility is simply not to confess, not to say anything, and in this case they will both be released after 1 year due to lack of any kind of evidences. In IR, the prisoner's dilemma is used by neoliberals, and the main target to use the prisoner's dilemma is to show the cooperation. For neoliberals, the main idea is that the states are actually going to enter in particular trade agreements or security organizations if they're going to see the utility of this in these actions, or they're going to participate in particular negotiation process if they're going to again see an utility of in the relations. So, for example, the negative impact of this is that the state will try to continuously use the reciprocity, let's say, principle for, let's say, to towards each other, and at the end or let's say they might actually end up instead of supporting each other or finding a solution, they might end up actually setting some punishments towards each other, and that might raise some hostile relations in a long run. So, for example, if we're talking about the peace, let's say, negotiations between the Palestine and Israel, due to a very long process in this direction, at certain points, both sides of the conflict actually became heavily hostile towards each other, and now the solution is actually way more difficult to find rather than it was, for example, 30 years ago. Yeah, that is basically everything that I wanted to talk about. Most of the concepts of realism and neo-realism and neoliberalism were discussed as part of the classic streams or as part of the game theories. So it's just one page which you have to read, and if you don't understand something, please do ask me questions. If you have any questions now, I'm available for this next 7 minutes. You can ask me questions. If not, you can prepare your